Leo Warren stood at the entrance to the private club in Soho, a carefully wrapped gift in his hands. He was about to push the heavy oak door open when he heard voices from inside. The unmistakable sound of Isabel Davenport and her friends. Seriously, Izzy, Leo is incredible. If it weren't for him these last 3 years, you never would have recovered this well. I know, right? A guy like that, spending all his time learning physical therapy, giving you massages, never getting a full night's sleep, just in case you had a breakdown. You have to hold on to that for life. He is a good person. Isabel's voice, low and gentle, finally cut in. Leo's fingertips tingled, a warmth spreading through his chest. The next second, someone asked the question that made the air freeze. So, when are you going to marry him? The private room fell unnervingly silent. Leo's hand hovered over the door handle, his heart starting to pound against his ribs. He held his breath, waiting for a verdict. After a long moment, Isabel's voice drifted out, cool and distant. He's like a brother to me. Like a brother? Her friends shrieked in unison. He spent 3 years of his life devoted to you. And you just see him as a brother? Izzy, don't tell me you're still hung up on Julian Croft. The guy didn't even send flowers after your accident. He just ran. Now that you're better, he's sniffing around again. You can fall for anyone, but not him. Isabel didn't say a word. Standing outside, Leo felt a giant hand squeeze his heart. Silence was its own answer. He had thought 3 years of unwavering devotion could win her heart, but it turned out her heart had always belonged to the man who'd abandoned her. 3 years ago, Isabel Davenport had lived on a different planet. An Ivy League graduate, heir to the Davenport corporate empire, an equestrian champion who skied in Aspen. Even her face looked like a masterpiece sculpted by God. And Leo? He was just a scholarship kid, sponsored by the Davenport Foundation. The first time he saw her was at the university's award ceremony. She stood on the stage, poised and coolly beautiful, an untouchable queen. He sat in the back row, clutching the envelope with his scholarship check, barely daring to applaud too loudly. Back then, the man standing beside her was Julian Croft, handsome, from a family of equal standing, the king of the campus. Everyone said they were a fairy tale prince and princess, until the car crash. Isabel's spine was severely damaged. The doctors said she might never walk again. Julian never even entered her hospital room. He sent a breakup text and vanished. The celebrated Miss Davenport, once the center of her universe, fell from grace overnight. She became volatile, depressive, and even tried to kill herself. Her parents were beside themselves with grief, helpless. That was when Leo stepped in. He knelt before her wheelchair and said softly, "Isabel, it's going to be okay. I'm here with you." For the next 3 years, he learned every massage technique he could find. He survived on 2 hours of sleep a night, terrified she might hurt herself. When she flew into a rage and tried to smash her own legs with a chair, he threw himself in front of her without a second thought, taking the blow himself. He stayed with her, year after year, becoming the single most important person in her life. Everyone said the only time Isabel could sleep peacefully was when Leo was in the room. Now she was healed. Everyone assumed she would marry him. Leo had allowed himself to dream of it, too. But now, hearing her words, how could he not understand? She was recovered, Julian was back, and it was time for the brother to make his exit. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The chatter in the room died instantly. All eyes snapped to him, guilt flashing in her friends' faces. "Leo? You? When did you get here?" One of them asked tentatively. "Just now." Leo smiled, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. He held out the gift to Isabel. "Congratulations on your recovery." Just as she reached for it, the doors swung open again. Julian Croft stood there, his eyes glistening. "Isabel, I heard you were all better. I came to congratulate you." The atmosphere in the room solidified. "What are you doing here?" Isabel's friends glared at him. "When Izzy had her accident, you ran faster than anyone. You have some nerve showing your face now." Julian flushed, his eyes turning red. He shoved a gift into Isabel's hands and turned to leave. But Isabel suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Since you're here, you should stay." Everyone froze, their gazes shifting in unison to Leo. He stood there, the smile fixed on his face, the only sign of turmoil, the way his nails dug deep into his palms. So, 3 years of companionship couldn't hold a candle to a single word of congratulations from Julian. The rest of the party was suffocatingly awkward. Isabel's friends deliberately ignored Julian, trying to push Leo and Isabel together. "Leo, when Izzy was doing her rehab, you massaged her legs every day, right?" "Of course he did. He's a total pro." Isabel wouldn't let anyone else touch her. Leo kept his head down, pretending not to see the hostile glare Julian was shooting his way. and though Isabel was quiet, he could feel her attention was fixed entirely on Julian. Someone suggested a party game. Julian was the first to lose, and his penalty was to get a woman's phone number. He instinctively looked at Isabel, a plea in his eyes. She just looked down at her phone, pretending not to see. Julian bit his lip and stood up, as if in a fit of pique. Fine, I'll go. Leo watched him walk over to the next booth, where he was quickly surrounded by a group of older, heavily made-up women dripping in jewels. One of them, clearly drunk, grabbed his wrist. Sure, handsome, I'll give you my number. But first, let's see what we're working with. Let go of me. Julian's shout cut through the music. Isabel's head shot up. The next second, she had stormed over and slapped the woman across the face. Are you trying to die? The scene erupted into chaos. Izzy, stop, her friends cried, rushing to pull her away. Fearing for her newly recovered body, Leo also ran over to stop her. Isabel, don't. Before he could finish, she shoved him hard. Get out of my way. Thump. Caught off guard, Leo lost his footing. He tumbled down the short flight of stairs connecting the tiered sections of the lounge, his head cracking against the polished concrete floor. His vision went black for a second, and warm blood trickled from his temple, staining his view red. He struggled to push himself up, only to see Isabel pulling Julian away, her back to him. She didn't even look back once. His heart felt like it had been ripped open, the pain stealing his breath. He suddenly remembered a different time, back when her legs were useless, when she was self-destructively smashing them with a chair. He had rushed in to stop her, and in her uncontrolled rage, she had broken 3 of his ribs. She had screamed at him, tears in her eyes. My legs are already ruined. It doesn't matter if I smash them. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Don't you know which is more important? He'd been sweating from the pain but stubbornly held on her legs, whispering, I know exactly what's important. It's because your legs are so important that I have to stop you. Because one day, I will make you stand again. In that moment, the ever-proud Isabel Davenport had trembled in his arms, her voice choked with tears. Leo, don't leave me. Everyone said Isabel's recovery was a miracle. But they both knew there was no miracle. There was only him, fighting with every ounce of his being to pull her back from the abyss. And now, she had walked out of the abyss, and she didn't need him anymore. Just then his phone buzzed. He shakily pulled it out. The name, Mrs. Davenport, on the screen stung his eyes. He knew exactly what this call was about. Sure enough, the moment he answered, Isabel's mother's polite but firm voice came through. Leo, dear, Isabel is the CEO of a publicly traded company now. Her husband can't be someone with no background, someone who can't help her career. I'm very grateful for your unwavering care these past 3 years. But you have to understand, if it weren't for the Davenport family sponsorship, you wouldn't have even made it through college. Let's just call this repayment for that kindness, shall we? Consider the debt settled. The line went quiet for a moment, as if she were waiting for him to erupt in hysterics or beg pathetically. But Leo just stared at the empty hallway where Isabel had disappeared, the space mocking his 3 years of one-sided devotion. Okay, he heard himself say, his voice terrifyingly calm. I'll leave. I'll never appear in front of her again. The gash on his forehead required 3 stitches. The doctor told him to keep it dry. He nodded numbly. As he walked out of the urgent care clinic, he spotted Isabel's Maybach parked just down the street. The window was halfway down. Julian was slumped against her shoulder, sobbing. Isabel, I'm so sorry for what happened back then. His voice was thick with emotion. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had a reason for leaving. My parents didn't approve of us. They forced me to go abroad, and they took my phone. It's not that I didn't want to find you. Isabel sat in silence, the line of her jaw soft in the dim light. Leo stood a short distance away, his feet feeling as if they were nailed to the pavement. Then why did you come back? Isabel finally asked, her voice low. Julian hung his head, tears tracing paths down his cheeks. Because I could never forget you. I know you have Leo now. I'm not asking for anything. Just don't push me away. Let me watch you from a distance. Leo stood in the shadows, watching as Isabel remained silent for a long time before finally reaching out to wipe away Julian's tears. I don't blame you, she said. And as for Leo, I just see him as a brother. It's not what you think. Julian's eyes lit up, his tears turning into a relieved smile. Really? Isabel nodded. Overcome with joy, Julian pulled her into another embrace. Leo let out a self-deprecating laugh, turned, and walked away, heading straight for the immigration office. Inside, a government clerk handed him a form. Your visa should be approved in about 2 weeks. Leo thanked him and stepped out into the evening gloom. He returned to Isabel's penthouse. For the past 3 years, To make caring for her easier, he had lived there. Once, he had naively considered it home. His slippers were still by the door, the houseplants he'd nurtured sat in the living room, and the stomach-friendly diet he'd written was still taped to the kitchen's stainless steel refrigerator. Now, he had to erase every trace of himself with his own 2 hands. While packing, he found a photograph at the bottom of a drawer. It was taken the day Isabel had successfully completed her physical therapy. She was offering a rare smile to the camera, and he was standing beside her, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears of joy. The edges of the photo were slightly worn, softened from how many times he had held it. Leo stared at it for a long time before gently tossing it into the trash can. Some dreams needed to end. The next morning, his phone rang. It was Isabel. "I forgot my stomach medicine. Can you bring it to the office?" Her voice was raspy with sleep, her tone so natural it was as if last night had never happened. Leo was silent for 2 seconds. "Okay." When he arrived at her company, the elevator doors opened to reveal Julian, holding an elegant takeout container. "What a coincidence," Julian said with a warm smile. "I'm bringing Isabel lunch. Want to join?" Leo didn't speak, just followed him into the office. Isabel was reviewing a document. Seeing them enter together, she raised an eyebrow. "How did you two end up together?" "Just ran into each other on the way up," Julian said, opening the container. The rich, spicy aroma of Nashville hot chicken instantly filled the air. "I got your favorite." Leo's face fell. Her stomach is a mess. She can't eat anything that's spicy. Isabel glanced at him, then picked up her fork. "A little bit once in a while won't hurt." She speared a piece of chicken dripping with fiery oil and ate it without a change in expression. Leo clenched the bottle of antacids in his pocket, his knuckles turning white. It wasn't long before a fine sheen of sweat appeared on Isabel's forehead. The hand holding her pen began to tremble slightly. "Izzy, are you feeling okay?" Julian asked, concerned. "I'm fine." Isabel forced a smile. "I have more work to do. You two can go." Leo gave her one last, deep look, silently placed the medicine on her desk, and turned to leave. Downstairs in the lobby, Leo couldn't stop himself. "Her stomach condition is serious. You should be more careful with what you bring her for lunch." Julian suddenly laughed. "Leo, have you still not figured out your place in all this?" To Isabel, "You're just a glorified caregiver. That's why you have to remember all these little details. But I'm different. She loves me. I don't need to pay attention to any of that." He stepped closer, a smirk playing on his lips. "Even if I gave her poison, she would drink it down with a smile. Do you understand?" Leo's fingers trembled. His heart felt like it was being torn apart. He knew Julian wasn't wrong. It had taken him 3 years just to get Isabel to look his way. Julian didn't have to do a thing, and she would willingly swallow poison for him. Leo was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water when he heard the front door open. He turned, the glass nearly slipping from his hand. "You didn't take the medicine?" he asked, his voice tight. "It was too bad. I had to go to the ER to get my stomach pumped." Isabel collapsed weakly onto the sofa, her bangs soaked with cold sweat. Leo's hand flinched. Scalding water from the kettle he'd just boiled splashed onto the back of his hand, turning it red instantly. Did she love Julian that much? So much that she would eat what he brought her, even if it meant a trip to the hospital? He brought her a glass of warm water and knelt beside her, gently massaging her stomach. After drinking the water and feeling his gentle touch, Isabel's brow finally relaxed. She drifted off to sleep, her head resting on his shoulder, just like countless times before. But this time, Leo didn't stay to gaze at her sleeping face. He carefully laid her down on the sofa, covered her with a blanket, and went upstairs without a backward glance. The next morning, Isabel was already dressed in a sharp business suit, standing in the living room. "Why is there so much stuff missing from the house?" she asked, frowning as she looked around. Leo opened his mouth, about to explain, but she had already changed the subject. "Julian has an art gallery opening today. He invited us to go together." He just got back to the city. He doesn't have many friends." Isabel cut him off. "Just think of it as showing support." Leo clenched his fists and finally nodded. At the gallery, Julian lit up the moment he saw Isabel, immediately linking his arm with hers. "Izzy, this is the one I wanted you to see most." He pointed to an oil painting of a snow-covered mountain, his voice soft. "I painted this in Switzerland. I was thinking of you every single day." Isabel listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the painting, her expression unreadable. In the end, she bought every single painting in the collection. Whispers immediately rippled through the crowd. "I heard Ms. Davenport was madly in love with him back in the day. It must be true. He abandoned her once, and she's still this supportive. That's got to be true love." Julian shot a triumphant look at Leo. While Isabel was at the front desk handling the payment, he walked over to him. Did you hear that? Even after I was gone for so long, I'm the only one in her heart. He lowered his voice, his lips almost touching Leo's ear. If you still haven't given up, I don't mind making things even clearer for you. Just as he finished speaking, the piercing shriek of the fire alarm ripped through the gallery. Fire! Everybody out! The crowd descended into chaos. Leo was knocked to the ground, his ankle twisting sharply under him. The pain made his vision blur. He struggled to get up, only to see Isabel pushing against the tide of people, rushing back inside. Julian, where are you? Her voice was filled with a panic Leo had never heard before. The next second, she found a terrified Julian grab his hand and pulled him toward the exit without a single look back. Leo sat paralyzed on the floor, watching their figures disappear into the thick smoke. He desperately tried to stand, but a loud crack echoed through the space. A burning ceiling beam was falling right toward him. When he woke up, all he saw was blinding white. Leo, you're finally awake. His friend, Mark, rushed to his bedside, his bloodshot eyes filled with relief. You scared the hell out of me. Do you have any idea how close you were dying? Leo moved his neck with difficulty. Every bone in his body felt like it had been broken and pieced back together. Where's Isabel? He asked, his voice hoarse. Mark's expression turned instantly sour. She's with Julian. You have a broken rib, but God forbid, mister. Croft gets a scratch. He needs to be looked after, you know. Leo closed his eyes, the pain in his chest making it hard to breathe. That woman is unbelievable. When she was paralyzed, who was it that never left her side? Who slept 2 hours a night, just in case she did something stupid? And now you're seriously hurt, and she... Mark's brow furrowed, his voice thick with anger. Leo, she's all better now, but she never says a word about being with you. How long are you going to let yourself be treated like this? The only sound in the room was the steady beep of the heart monitor. After a long time, Leo spoke softly. I'm finalizing my visa application. Once it's approved, he stared at the ceiling, his voice barely a whisper. I'm leaving. Just as he said it, the door to the hospital room was thrown open. Leaving? Isabel stood in the doorway, her face dark. Who's leaving? It's nothing. Mark's busy with work. He has to go, Leo said, looking down to avoid Isabel's searching gaze. Mark shot him a look, wanted to say more, but ultimately held his tongue. He just shot a final, angry glare at Isabel. Leo, call me if you need anything. Once the door closed, Isabel walked over to the bed, her tone tinged with apology. There were so many people. I didn't see you. It's fine, Leo interrupted her calmly, reaching for the water glass on the bedside table. As he shifted, the collar of his hospital gown slipped, revealing a nasty burn mark just below his collarbone. Isabel's pupils constricted. How did you get so hurt? They told me it was just minor smoke inhalation. Leo glanced down at the burn, then nonchalantly pulled his gown back into place. It's nothing serious. Isabel's brow furrowed. I had no idea you were hurt that badly. I thought you just passed out from the smoke. He managed a weak, humorless smile. How could she have known? Her eyes only saw Julian. How could she possibly have noticed how badly he was hurt? Leo didn't say anything, just took a sip of water. I'll take care of you for the next few days, Isabel said suddenly. No need. Leo shook his head. You're busy with work. Don't worry about me. Isabel was about to argue when her phone rang. Izzy. On the other end, Julian's voice was laced with self-pity. My hand really hurts. The doctor said the cut might get infected. Isabel's expression immediately became hesitant. Leo watched her, a small smile playing on his lips. You should go. Isabel clutched her phone, her brow creased. I'm not very good at taking care of people anyway. I'll hire a private nurse for you. Leo nodded. Okay. After Isabel rushed out, the room was finally quiet again. Leo stared at the ceiling and suddenly chuckled. She said she would take care of him, but one phone call from Julian and she was gone without a second thought. Just like in the fire, when she had rushed toward Julian without a single glance back at him. He slowly closed his eyes, the pain in his chest nearly suffocating him. Some promises should never have been believed in the first place. The day he was discharged, Isabel came to pick him up herself. There's a charity auction tonight. You're coming with me, she said, handing him a new cashmere coat. Leo instinctively refused. You don't have to. Still angry? Isabel frowned slightly, assuming he was sulking. I really didn't see you. The moment I realized you hadn't come out, I sent the emergency crew back in to find you. Leo opened his mouth, then silently took the coat. Only after they were in the car did he realize Julian was there too. Julian wanted to go, so I brought him along, Isabel explained casually. Leo said nothing, sitting quietly in the back seat. The entire ride, Julian chattered excitedly with Isabel, talking about everything from their childhood memories to his time studying abroad. Isabel didn't say much, but she responded to everything he said naturally. Leo just stared out the window at the passing city, a silent outsider. At the auction, Isabel bid on and won every single item that Julian so much as glanced at. Her lavish spending quickly drew the attention of those around them. Isn't that Ms. Davenport? She's so generous with her lover. I heard her boyfriend took care of her for 3 years. She must really love him. Wait, that doesn't look like the Mr. Warren from the news. Isn't that the guy who dumped her? Amid the whispers, someone mistook Julian for Leo. Isabel froze for a second when she heard it, as if just remembering Leo was there. She turned to him. Is there anything you want? At that moment, a sapphire brooch was presented on stage, glowing like the deep sea under the lights. Leo's gaze lingered on it for just a second too long. Isabel immediately raised her paddle. 10 million. That piece has quite a story, Julian interjected suddenly. It was a gift from a European princess to her lover, a symbol of loyalty and undying love. He shot a meaningful look at Leo. It would be a very fitting gift from Mr. Warren. Isabel's fingers paused. After the brooch was brought to their table, she handed it directly to Julian. This suits you better. Should you really? Julian feigned hesitation. Isn't this what Mr. Warren wanted? I'll get him something else. Isabel looked at Leo. What do you want? Leo lowered his eyes, a self-mocking smile touching his lips. A gift symbolizing loyalty couldn't be given to him, but it could be given to Julian. The difference between being loved and not being loved was, apparently, that obvious. While Isabel was surrounded by people eager to chat, Julian took the opportunity to approach Leo. Leo, you have to see things clearly now, don't you? Julian whispered, a triumphant smirk on his lips. Isabel loves me. If you keep clinging to her like this, you'll only make her resent you. Leo looked at him calmly, his eyes placid. You'll get what you want. What's that supposed to mean? Julian frowned. Leo didn't answer. He just turned to leave. Ah! A sharp cry came from behind him. Leo whirled around to see Julian tumbling down the grand staircase. Leo! Isabel's furious shout echoed through the hall. She rushed over and shoved Leo aside, the force of it sending him stumbling back against a wall. What did Julian ever do to you? How could you do this to him? She demanded, her eyes dangerously cold. Even if I failed to protect you before, you can take it out on me. Why do you have to hurt him? Leo's back was pressed against the cold marble, his voice quiet but firm. I didn't do it. Isabel. Julian weakly grabbed her hand. It was me. I wasn't careful. It has nothing to do with Mr. Warren. Don't you dare defend him. Isabel shot Leo a final, frigid look, then bent down to help Julian up. I'm not dealing with you. Find your own way home. Leo stood frozen, watching Isabel hurry away with Julian. Her cashmere scarf was now draped over Julian's shoulders, and she held him as if he were a priceless treasure. It was always like this. The moment Julian shed a tear, the blame was automatically his. He felt the plane ticket in his pocket. A flight to London, 1 week from now. It would carry away all his love and all his pain. She wouldn't have to feel burdened by him anymore, because soon, this burden would disappear from her world forever. The auction house was far from the penthouse, located in a remote, exclusive area. Leo couldn't get an Uber or a cab, and had no choice but to walk. He was only halfway there when it started to rain. The cold water soaked his hair and clothes. His shoes filled with water, and every step felt like walking on knives. By the time he finally made it home, his feet were blistered and bleeding, and a fever was beginning to set in. He forced himself to find some medicine and tend to his wounds before collapsing into a feverish sleep. The next day, he was woken by noises downstairs. As he came down the stairs, he saw the living room was cluttered with Julian's luggage. Isabel's voice carried from the living room. Julian's parents are out of the country, and it's not convenient for him to live alone. He'll be staying here for a few days. You'd better watch yourself. No more of your petty tricks. Leo gripped the banister, his face pale as he descended. I won't. He wouldn't play any more tricks, and he wouldn't love her anymore. She would remember that Julian didn't eat cilantro and would proactively switch his plate if a dish contained it. During a thunderstorm, she would rush to Julian's side first. The study, a room Leo had never been allowed to enter, was now a space Julian could come and go from as he pleased. Leo finally understood. This is what Isabel was like when she was in love. He thought back to all the times over the past few years when her depressive episodes would lessen simply because he was in the room, and how he had secretly rejoiced, thinking it was a sign she was starting to love him. How laughable. One day, As Leo passed the study, he caught a glimpse of Julian toying with something. He stopped, peering through the half-open door. In Julian's hand was the vintage Cartier pendant that had belonged to Isabel's grandmother. The pendant dangled precariously from his fingertips, nearly slipping several times. Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He burst into the room and snatched the pendant from him. "What are you doing?" This was Isabel's grandmother's. "You can't just—" "What's it to you?" Julian snatched it back impatiently. Seeing Leo's alarm, a malicious smile spread across his face. "You care about this a lot, don't you? In that case." He deliberately loosened his grip. Clink! The pendant hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 2 pieces. Leo's heart practically stopped. That was the thing Isabel cherished most in the world, an heirloom her grandmother had given her on her deathbed. "What's going on?" Isabel's voice came from the doorway. Leo looked up to see her staring, her face a thunderous mask, at the broken pieces on the floor. "Mr. Warren dropped it," Julian said first, his voice laced with false innocence. "I was just looking at it, and he rushed in and tried to grab it from me." Isabel's gaze turned to ice. "Leo, how could you?" "The study has security cameras," Leo interrupted quietly, his own voice trembling slightly. "You can see for yourself what really happened." The air in the room froze. Julian's expression flickered, and he quickly changed his story. "I'm sorry, Izzy. It was me. I broke it by accident. Was it important to you? I could buy you another one, exactly the same." To Leo's astonishment, Isabel's anger vanished in an instant. She hurried to Julian's side and took his hand. "Did you hurt yourself?" Leo stood there, watching as Isabel meticulously inspected Julian's fingers. It felt as if a piece of his own heart had been cruelly carved out. No one knew better than him what that pendant meant to Isabel. 3 years ago, when her mother had accidentally misplaced it, Isabel had just undergone another surgery on her legs. She had dragged her ailing body out into a snowstorm and searched for 3 hours. When she came back, she'd had a massive fight with her mother and locked herself in a room, smashing things. It was Leo who had braved the blizzard, searching the grounds inch by inch. His fingers had gone numb from the cold, but he had finally found the pendant at dawn. And now, Julian had intentionally shattered it, and all she cared about was whether he had hurt his hand. Leo laughed to himself, a bitter, hollow sound. So this was how much she loved Julian. And he had been so naive, so foolish, to think that once she recovered, she would marry him. How many nights had he sat by her bedside, watching her endure the agony of physical therapy, silently promising himself he would be with her forever. He'd even scribbled a ridiculous wish in his journal during her darkest days. Propose to her the day she stands again. Looking back now, he was nothing but a complete and utter joke. But at least, finally he was awake. That uncherished love of his, he would never offer it up again. It wasn't until dinner one evening that Julian suddenly clutched his stomach, crying out in pain before collapsing, pale-faced, into Isabel's arms. "What's wrong?" Isabel panicked, immediately calling her private doctor. After an examination, the doctor's face was grim. "It's poisoning." The entire mansion descended into chaos. The staff stood by, trembling, as the head butler began interrogating them about the dinner preparations. I saw," a young maid stammered timidly. "I saw Mr. Warren add something to the soup." Isabel's gaze instantly turned to ice. She strode over to Leo and seized his wrist, her grip so tight it felt like it would shatter his bones. "Just because of that pendant, you try to kill Julian? Leo, what have you become?" Leo looked up at her, his voice very soft. "I didn't do it." Still denying it? Isabel's eyes were cold with fury. She turned to a servant. "Bring the rest of the soup." Leo's pupils shrank. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to teach you a lesson," Isabel said, grabbing his chin, her voice like ice. "So in the future, you'll know what you can and cannot do." A servant brought the remaining soup. At Isabel's signal, they forced it down Leo's throat. Leo struggled desperately, but 2 large security guards held him fast. The warm liquid was forced down his throat, and he choked violently. The poison took effect with terrifying speed. Leo collapsed to his knees, pain ripping through him. Cold sweat soaked his back in seconds. He curled into a ball, his nails digging into his palms, yet he stubbornly repeated, "I didn't poison him." Isabel didn't even glance at him. She stayed by Julian's bedside the entire time, gently helping him sip water, dabbing his forehead with a cool, damp cloth, her eyes soft enough to melt glaciers. "Izzy," Julian weakly grabbed her hand. "Mr. Warren, don't speak up for him." Isabel cooed softly. "You just rest." Leo's consciousness began to fade. The intense pain made his vision go black. The last thing he remembered was being roughly carried onto a stretcher. He spent the entire night in the hospital. No one came to see him. When he returned to the penthouse the next day, the house was empty. His phone vibrated. It was a photo from Julian, sent to him directly. Under a brilliant blue sky, Isabel had her arm wrapped around Julian's waist. They were both smiling brightly at the camera. The caption read, "Someone brought me to the beach to relax. Said I needed it after being sick." Leo quietly locked his screen and began to pack. As he zipped up his suitcase, he was struck by how few of his belongings were actually in this place he'd lived in for 3 years. A single 24-inch suitcase held every last trace of him. It turned out he had never truly belonged here, just as he had never truly found a way into her heart. "Have you learned your lesson?" Isabel's voice came from behind him. Leo turned to see her standing in the doorway, dressed in a sleek black dress, a frown on her face as she looked him over. "I've learned my lesson," he said softly. "My mistake was falling in love with you. My mistake was stubbornly staying by your side for all these years." Isabel's expression softened slightly. "Good. Get changed. We're going to a party." "A party?" Leo was taken aback. "Did you forget it's my birthday today?" Isabel's frown deepened, her tone laced with disbelief, as if his forgetting was the most unreasonable thing in the world. Leo's mind went blank for a moment. Right? It was her birthday. In years past, he would have already prepared a cake, chosen a thoughtful gift, and personally decorated everything. He would remember her favorite flavors, the decorations she hated, and her birthday wish every single year. But now he had forgotten. "You go ahead," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I'll get changed, get a gift ready, and meet you there." "Izzy," Julian's voice called from downstairs, full of possessive confidence. "Everyone's waiting for you." Isabel nodded, giving Leo one last look. "Be quick." With that, she turned and left, her footsteps fading down the hall. Leo stood motionless, watching her back disappear, a self-mocking smile touching his lips. "Isabel, this time, my birthday gift to you is to disappear from your world forever, to let you and Julian have your happiness, and to finally let myself go." He picked up the suitcase he had already packed, took one last look around the place he had called home for 3 years, and walked out without looking back. The airport was a blur of people. Leo stood at the boarding gate, took out his phone, and sent one last message to Isabel. "Isabel, I'm gone. I wish you and Julian a lifetime of love and happiness." Then, he turned off his phone and walked toward the jet bridge. 3 years of devotion, a dream now shattered. From this day forward, their paths would never cross again. As one of New York City's most powerful families, the Davenports were titans of industry, and the birthday party for the heir, Isabel Davenport, was the social event of the season. The guest list was a who's who of the city's elite, but the woman at the center of it all seemed distracted, her mind a million miles away. Her friends were the first to notice. "Hey, this is weird. How come Leo isn't here yet? You don't think he forgot, do you?" "No way. When have you ever known Leo to forget anything about Izzy?" "True, but the party's half over. This is the latest he's ever been." The women exchanged glances, their eyes eventually settling on Isabel. Seeing her zoned out, Chloe finally ventured. "Izzy, maybe you should give Leo another call?" "No need. He's just preparing my gift," Isabel replied, shaking her head instinctively. Her friends, though still feeling uneasy, dropped the subject. Maybe they really were overthinking it. Just then, the gift-giving portion of the evening began. Chloe and the others presented their presents, and soon it was Julian's turn. Although none of them could stand the man who had abandoned Isabel, it was her birthday, so they held their tongues. He approached her with a shy smile, offering his personally prepared gift with both hands. "Isabel, this is for—" He never got to finish his sentence. Isabel glanced at her phone. Her expression changed dramatically, and right in front of everyone, she shoved him aside and ran for the door. Caught completely off guard, Julian was knocked to the floor. A sharp pain shot through his ankle, and his face contorted. He instinctively tried to call out to her, but Isabel, the woman who usually put him first, didn't even spare him a glance as she fled the grand ballroom. For a moment, the entire party was stunned into silence, guests staring at each other, utterly bewildered. Chloe and the others were just as shocked. Then, one of them remembered the person who still hadn't shown up, and her face paled. "You don't think something happened to Leo, do you?" At that, they all started to panic and rushed out after her, leaving Julian alone on the floor. When he heard their parting words, he clenched his fists in rage. Leo. It was always Leo, but no one cared what he was thinking. By the time Isabel sped back to the penthouse, it was completely empty. Still, she refused to give up. She raced upstairs and searched every conceivable spot, but there was nothing. Not only was Leo gone, but so was everything related to him. She stood, blank and lost, in the empty room, staring at the text message on her phone and the number underneath his contact name. After a long moment, as if just remembering, she dialed the number. She didn't even realize her own hand was trembling violently. The dial tone buzzed in her ear, a frantic sound that mirrored the chaos in her heart. But Leo didn't answer. Just as the call automatically disconnected, the doorbell rang. She didn't know how she made it downstairs to open the door. Seeing Chloe and her other friends standing there looking worried, a sense of unreality washed over her. Izzy, why did you suddenly run back here? Did something happen to Leo? She forced herself to ignore the strange, aching tightness in her chest. She opened her mouth, but it took a long time for the words to come out, raw and hoarse. Leo said, "He's gone." Gone? Gone where? Chloe stared, her worried expression freezing on her face. The other women were equally stunned. None of them had ever considered the possibility of Leo leaving. Over the years, they had watched Isabel go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows after her accident. They had seen people come and go from her life. Even they, her closest friends, hadn't had the courage to stay by her side constantly through her darkest, most volatile moods. Only Leo had remained. He had come to her when she was at her absolute worst, offering boundless patience and forgiveness. No matter how she yelled at him or pushed him away, he had never once thought of leaving. Why now so suddenly? Just then, her phone rang again. Almost on reflex, Isabel answered it. "Leo, where are you?" But before she could finish, Julian's voice came through the line. "Izzy, I twisted my ankle. Can you take me to the hospital?" Normally, Isabel would have rushed to his side. But perhaps it was Leo's sudden departure that had thrown her into a panic, because she rejected him without a second thought. "I'm busy right now. Find someone else." Her words were so sharp that even Chloe and the others looked at her in surprise. But seeing her put distance between herself and Julian was something they were all happy to witness. Julian, on his end, hadn't expected such a blunt refusal. He gritted his teeth, his expression hardening, but he forced a tone of understanding, his voice dripping with disappointment. "Okay, did something happen with Mr. Warren? You seemed so anxious when you left." Isabel then remembered shoving something, or someone, in her haste. After a moment's hesitation, she spoke. "Wait, I'm on my way." She hung up and turned back toward the party, leaving her friends to exchange bewildered looks. "At the hospital. It's just a minor sprain. Put some ointment on it and rest for a few days." The doctor handed Isabel the x-ray results. Relieved that he was okay, she started to lead Julian out. But as she turned, a familiar figure entered her line of sight. Leo. Her face changed. Ignoring Julian, she rushed forward and grabbed the man's arm. Perhaps because of the message she'd just received, she gripped him with all her might, as if afraid he would escape again. But when she pulled him around, she saw a stranger's face. It was then she realized her mistake. The man, yelping in pain from her sudden, tight grip, glared at her. "Who the hell are you?" "Sorry, I thought you were someone else." She let go, shamefaced, and muttered an apology. She watched him walk away, her mind unable to process it. It wasn't him. Had he really left? "Izzy, what's wrong?" Julian, having finally suppressed his own frustration, managed to smile and limped to her side. He saw her staring blankly in the direction the man had gone and couldn't help but speak up. She shook her head and helped him back to his room. After settling him in, she stepped outside and made a call to her assistant. Find out where Leo Warren went. That evening, at her mother's request, Isabel went back to the Davenport family estate. She was still trying to figure out how to explain Leo's departure when she realized her mother wasn't the least bit surprised to see her arrive alone. Mrs. Davenport greeted her with a warm smile. "You're just in time. Maria just finished cooking. It's your birthday, so she made all your favorites. Come sit." Isabel was led to the dining table, but as she looked up, she saw a strange man sitting across from her. A flicker of unease went through her. She looked at her mother and asked nonchalantly, "Who's this?" "This is your Uncle Vance's son, Spencer," Mrs. Davenport said, then turned to him, her eyes beaming. She placed a piece of food on Isabel's plate. "Spencer, this is my daughter, Isabel. You could just call her Izzy." "Thank you, Mrs. Davenport." Spencer Vance nodded politely at her mother before turning to Isabel and extending a hand. "Izzy, you can call me Spencer." Spencer knew exactly what this dinner was about. The Davenports and the Vances were social and financial equals, and the two family companies were currently in partnership negotiations. This dinner was meant to do more than just foster goodwill. It was a clear matchmaking attempt. Spencer knew about the two men in Isabel's life, but he wasn't concerned. After all, one of them was the man who had abandoned her at her lowest. She might have some lingering attachment born of pride and rejection, but who could truly forgive someone for that? The other was just some kid from the sticks with no background. If it weren't for the Davenport's charity, he never would have even crossed paths with Isabel. Even if he'd earned some favor by taking care of her after the accident, he was hardly a threat. In Isabel's heart, he didn't even measure up to Julian Croft. Isabel understood her mother's intentions immediately. Her face darkened. She stared at Spencer's outstretched hand and refused to take it. The atmosphere grew stiff. Mrs. Davenport quickly jumped in to smooth things over, guiding Spencer back to his seat. Isabel's always been a bit reserved. Don't mind her. She'll warm up once you get to know her. Spencer's smile was a little rigid, but he said nothing. A golden child like Isabel was bound to have a temper, especially after everything she'd been through. Mrs. Davenport had hoped a simple introduction would lead to a gradual connection, but she hadn't expected Isabel to be so uncooperative. When Spencer tried to start a conversation, Isabel gave one-word answers. When Mrs. Davenport tried to build a bridge, Isabel would change the subject, her dismissiveness on full display. Throughout the entire meal, Isabel acted as if Spencer wasn't even there. If at first he could tolerate it, her continued coldness finally broke his patience. He abruptly stood up to leave. Mrs. Davenport, it seems Ms. Davenport has no interest in continuing this conversation. Perhaps we should just leave it at that. The dinner ended on a sour note. Mrs. Davenport walked a frustrated Spencer out, then returned to shoot an exasperated glare at her daughter. What was that all about? I asked you to come for a simple dinner, and you cause a scene. Isabel hadn't even looked up as Spencer left, simply continuing to pick at her food. Hearing her mother's words, she replied nonchalantly, "We didn't mention this was part of the plan when you invited me. The two families have a deal in the works. I just thought it would be good for you to make a new friend, that's all." Mrs. Davenport sighed, seeing her daughter's indifferent expression. "Fine. If you don't like him, I'll find someone else." But as soon as she said it, Isabel put down her fork. "Don't waste your time. I'm not interested. Isabel, it's not that I'm trying to rush you, but you have to get married eventually." Mrs. Davenport sighed again. "I know you're still not over that Julian Croft, but Isabel, don't forget, when you had your accident, he was the first person to cut ties with you." Hearing her mother bring up Julian, Isabel should have defended him. But for some reason, the words that came out were different. "What about Leo? Weren't you always hoping he'd be my husband?" Hearing Leo's name again, Mrs. Davenport froze for a second. Her answer was almost reflexive. "Leo? Hasn't he already moved abroad?" "Abroad?" Isabel's face paled. She shot up from her chair and stared at her mother. "What are you talking about?" Perhaps startled by her daughter's intense reaction, Mrs. Davenport's gaze darted away, and she began to stammer. What do you mean? You must have misheard me." She turned to leave, but Isabel was faster, blocking her path in an instant. She stood there, silent but immovable, a formidable barrier. Mrs. Davenport had the distinct feeling that if she didn't explain herself, Isabel would stand there all night. A flicker of annoyance rose in her. He was just some poor kid. Was it worth confronting her own mother like this? Fine. Yes, he's gone abroad. So what? Seeing her mother's expression and recalling her strange behavior all day, Isabel knew. "What did you do to him?" she asked, her voice low and laced with a barely concealed fury. Hearing that, Mrs. Davenport's face hardened. She sat down at the dining table, assuming an air of casual authority. She glanced at her daughter's dark face and smirked. "Isabel, don't make it sound so ugly. What do you mean, what did I do to him? He's a grown man. What could I possibly do? He's just a poor kid with no connections. If our family hadn't sponsored his education, who knows where he'd be today? Now, not only has he finished college, he has a chance to go abroad. You should be grateful, and he was smart enough to know it." He agreed quite readily. Isabel had never imagined this was the truth. She had suspected her mother might have had a hand in his leaving, but she never thought Leo would have left willingly. "Impossible," she whispered, her face turning ashen, her voice trembling. Seeing her daughter so devastated, Mrs. Davenport's tone softened. She tried to console her. "Isabel, if they can leave you so easily, it just means it wasn't meant to be. You are the sole heir to the Davenport Corporation. The line of men who want to marry you is a mile long. Why waste your time on those two?" After leaving the family estate, Isabel went straight to the most exclusive private club in the city. In a private room, she drank shot after shot, the table in front of her quickly filling with empty glasses. She drank so much that her consciousness began to blur. Chloe watched her, wanting to say something but hesitating. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. Izzy, you should slow down. The doctor said you shouldn't drink so much. The others chimed in, but no one dared to mention Leo's name. Despite their pleas, Isabel didn't seem to hear them, just continuing to pour glass after glass down her throat. Helpless, Chloe took out her phone and dialed a number. Julian was surprised to get a call from her. From the day he'd returned, he could feel the palpable dislike from Chloe and her friends. He knew why, but he'd never cared. As long as Isabel didn't care about those details, what did anyone else matter? Seeing that the call wasn't disconnecting, he finally answered. What's up? Izzy's drunk. You should come get her. Hearing it was about Isabel, Julian didn't hesitate. He rushed over to the club. By the time he got to the private room, she was completely passed out. The side of the table covered in empty glasses shocked even him. What happened? Why did she drink so much? How could they answer that? How could they tell the one person who might be able to calm her down that she was in this state because of another man? Luckily, Julian didn't press the issue. Seeing her so drunk, his concern took over. He went to her side and gently tried to wake her. Izzy, how are you feeling? A man's voice whispered in her ear. She blearily opened her eyes, but couldn't make out his face. The presence felt familiar, though, so when he moved closer, she didn't resist, letting him lift her into his arms. She's had way too much to drink. I'll take her home, Julian announced, readily taking on the task. Chloe and the others quickly nodded, happy to pass off the responsibility. As they watched the two of them leave, one of the friends, a woman named Ashley, finally spoke. What do you think is going on with her? Chloe shook her head and sighed deeply. Who knows? If Isabel loved Julian, she should have been happy now that Leo was gone, finally free to choose. But she wasn't. If she loved Leo, then why did she always say he was just a brother and constantly favor Julian? No one understood what Isabel was thinking. Not even Isabel herself. The next time Isabel woke up, it was morning. Blinding sunlight streamed through the open window, and a splitting hangover headache assaulted her. She groaned, rubbing her temples, and instinctively glanced at the bedside table. Sure enough, there was a glass of hangover remedy waiting for her. A thought struck her, and a jolt of hope shot through her mind. She threw off the covers and ran out of the room, heading straight for the kitchen. The clatter of porcelain filled the air. She pushed open the door, a name escaping her lips. Leo. The figure at the counter froze for a second, then quickly resumed his task. He turned around, pretending not to have heard. Izzy, you're awake. There's a hangover drink on your nightstand. Did you drink it? Never mind. That one's probably cold by now. I'll get you a fresh one. He turned back and poured another glass, handing it to her with a smile. Isabel looked at it, was silent for a moment, and then took it. How is it? Julian asked, his eyes filled with anticipation as he watched her drink. The remedy did ease her headache a little, but the taste wasn't quite right. It was different from the ones Leo used to make for her after she'd had too much to drink. The name Leo echoed her mind. She paused, then finally nodded. It's good. Silence fell between them again. Just as Julian was about to say something else, she spoke abruptly. Your parents should be back in the country by now, right? The question was so sudden that Julian didn't even process its meaning before nodding. They got back 3 days ago. The next second, he heard her say, the only reason I let you stay here was because your parents are gone. Now that they're back, you should move out today. I'll have someone drive you. She turned and walked away without waiting for his reaction. Izzy. But Julian wasn't going to let her leave like that. When she didn't even turn around, he rushed forward and grabbed her hand. Izzy, what does this mean? Are you kicking me out? He looked panicked, his grip tightening unconsciously. Isabel felt the pressure on her wrist and frowned slightly. She pulled her arm free, her voice edged with impatience. You shouldn't have come here in the first place. The words were so cold, so final, that they both froze when they were spoken. In an instant, Isabel saw Julian's eyes well up with tears. I'm sorry. You don't have to drive me. I'll leave right now. What was she doing? As she watched Julian's retreating figure, she pressed her lips together but said nothing. Fine, let it be, she thought. Maybe she needed to think to really figure out what it was she wanted. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. JFK Airport, New York City. A plane left a white trail across the sky as it descended for landing. In the crowded, noisy arrivals hall, Leo, dressed in a light shirt, stood out among the bundled-up crowd. He pulled his heavy suitcase through the throng, muttering to himself, I can't believe it's this cold in New York in the summer. I need to find a place to change. The woman beside him couldn't help but laugh. She unwrapped her own scarf and draped it over his shoulders. I told you it was going to be unusually cold, but you wouldn't listen. Serves you right. The scarf, still warm from her body, enveloped him completely. He opened his mouth to say something, but then thought better of it and fell silent. He was at her mercy, so he'd let it slide for now. Dr. Evelyn Reed easily took the suitcase from his hand and started toward the exit. But after a few steps, Leo suddenly stopped. "I'm going to the restroom. Wait for me here." He turned and walked away. When he came back out, he saw someone else was there. A woman in a black trench coat was leaning against a pillar, as if waiting for someone. He didn't think much of it and was about to walk past when the woman moved. She turned, revealing a face that was painfully familiar. It was Isabel Davenport. "I knew it was you," Isabel said, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't decipher. She didn't move closer, but she stood directly in his path, blocking his exit. After a long silence, she spoke again. "I saw someone who looked familiar rushing over here, so I came to check. You, how'd you been these past few years?" Leo didn't really understand why she was waiting for him, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I've been good." On that point, Leo wasn't lying. When he had first arrived in Boston alone, he didn't know a soul, and the little money he had didn't last long. The beginning was, to put it mildly, difficult. But then he met Evelyn. She was his landlord, and later, his confidant and girlfriend. It was a stroke of luck. Just when he was desperate for work and a place to live, Evelyn had appeared. She was also Chinese-American, having moved to the States with her father years ago. After years of hard work, she had her own successful therapy practice. Leo had initially only intended to rent a room for a short time, promising her he would move out as soon as he found a job. It was only after a few days when they started talking about their hometowns that they realized they were from the same region. She was even an alumna of his university, 3 years ahead of him. She had moved abroad with her father, while Leo, to take care of Isabel, had given up his own graduate studies. Otherwise, they might have met long before. But fate was a funny thing. They had missed their first chance to meet, but found each other again in Boston. She had extended a hand to him when he was at his lowest, giving him a place to stay. Later, Leo became a therapist at her clinic. Thanks to Evelyn, he was given significant autonomy and trust. When his confidence faltered, a result of being disconnected from his profession while caring for Isabel, it was Evelyn who encouraged him, step by step, to find his footing again. And then, they got to know each other, fell in love, and built a life together. After a long silence, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Isabel, dressed in her black trench coat, now stood so close that her shadow nearly enveloped him. She raised a hand, as if to touch him, but let it fall back to her side, a gesture of profound uncertainty. "Leo, I'm sorry." The apology was 3 years late, but she couldn't help but think it's only 3 years. Better than a lifetime of never seeing him again. The sudden, context-less apology left Leo momentarily stunned. "What?" he asked reflexively. After asking, he seemed to remember something, but he wasn't sure which of the many past offenses she was apologizing for, so he just remained silent. Across from him, Isabel began to explain. "I didn't know my mother would force you to leave. I never wanted you to go." Before she could finish, Leo shook his head, cutting her off. "Your mother didn't force me to leave. She just happened to make the offer at a time when I was already planning on leaving." Her words hit Isabel with the force of a physical blow. In the years since Leo had left, she had replayed countless scenarios in her mind, especially after learning of her mother's involvement. She had always clung to the hope that Leo hadn't left of his own free will, but had been forced out. She had imagined what their reunion would be like. Would he be happy to see her? Would he still be angry? But she had never imagined this, that he had left willingly, and that upon seeing her again, he would be so cold, as if she were just a casual acquaintance from a forgotten past. A sharp pain lanced through her heart. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, choked by a grief so thick she couldn't breathe. He was so cruel that after all these years, he wouldn't even offer a small lie to soften the blow. But the thought of giving up was unbearable. A voice inside her screamed in protest. It shouldn't be like this. At the very least, he shouldn't be this indifferent. "I know everything that happened back then, Leo. I'm sorry. I was too insecure. I couldn't face you after you'd seen me at my absolute worst. I was so young, so childish. I let my pride become everything, thinking that was what I wanted." As she spoke, the corners of her eyes began to turn red. Before Leo could respond, she pressed on. "And I know I wrongly accused you so many times. I'm sorry. I was so arrogant, always believing that what I saw was the truth. If it hadn't been for what happened later, if it hadn't been for later, for when she told Julian to go home, and he'd run off on his own, helpless, she had sent someone to pack his things, only for them to discover his recent online purchases of poison and the leftover bottle he hadn't had time to dispose of. Only then did she know that Leo had never poisoned Julian. It was because of that discovery that she went back and checked the security footage from the auction house, from the art gallery, from her own home. Only then did she realize just how many times she had wronged him. But the truth had come too late. She had never had the chance to apologize in person. Now, the chance was finally here, but he seemed to have already moved on. Leo truly didn't care anymore. The truth had arrived far too late, and he was long past the point of needing it. What good was a simple apology now? It couldn't undo the hurt he had suffered. So many years had passed, and Leo refused to let the pain of the past trap him forever. Ms. Davenport, is there anything else? If not, I should get going. My fiancé is waiting for me outside. You have a fiancé? As if baffled by her intense reaction, Leo nodded again, matter-of-factly. He saw no reason to hide it. He was immensely proud of the woman he was going to marry. He paused, then, as if remembering something, looked back at Isabel. Actually, we came back to plan our wedding. We probably won't be returning after this. But if you'd like to come, you're more than welcome. Just as the words left his mouth, a voice called his name from a short distance away. He looked up and saw Evelyn approaching. Leo, what's taking you so long in the restroom? I was about to send out a search party. Halfway through her sentence, Evelyn noticed Isabel. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Leo, who is this? This is Isabel Davenport, the CEO of the Davenport Corporation. She's from the family whose foundation sponsored my education, Leo said, making the introductions without any pretense. He then turned to Isabel. This is Dr. Evelyn Reed, my fiancée. The simple introduction stung Isabel in two distinct ways. She couldn't believe that one day she would hear Leo refer to her merely as a benefactor from his past, while this Evelyn was introduced with such intimacy and pride. Before Evelyn appeared, she could still delude herself, telling herself that the fiancé was just an excuse, a way to spite her. But the moment Evelyn stood before her, that last shred of hope was shattered. From the way Leo unconsciously moved closer to Evelyn, to the respectful but distant tone he used for Isabel versus the warm, intimate one for his fiancée, it was clear. Even if they weren't engaged, their relationship was profound. Ms. Davenport, I've heard so much about you, Evelyn said, her eyes narrowing slightly. A polite smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. She had only ever heard Leo's side of the story, about how he was born in a small, poor town where his parents didn't value education, and how they had tried to pull him out of school to work and marry young. She knew he was saved by the Davenport couple, who had sponsored his education all the way through college. At the time, she never connected that story with the powerful Davenport Corporation. And she had never connected the poor, nameless scholarship student from those stories with a man who had selflessly cared for a paralyzed heiress for years, only to be cast aside once he was no longer needed. She saw the shock and pain in Isabel's eyes and instantly understood what was going through her mind. After a moment of silence from Isabel, Evelyn suddenly smiled and extended her hand. Actually, I should thank you for letting him go. The gratitude was genuine. After all, if Isabel and her family had known how to cherish him, if they had valued the young man who was willing to give up his burgeoning career to care for her after a decade of studying to escape his origins, then perhaps, if Isabel had just once said, "Let's get married," none of this would have ever come to pass. The tension between the two women was thick enough to cut with a knife. Leo looked from one to the other, then mumbled a quick goodbye and led Evelyn away. Once they were a safe distance away, Leo gave Evelyn a strange look. You were acting weird back there. She feigned innocence. Weird? How so? You must be seeing things. The wheels of the suitcase rumbled on the tiled floor. Leo thought for a moment, and then realized what was off. He couldn't help but chuckle. Why are you jealous of her? Seeing his genuinely nonchalant expression, Evelyn became even more dissatisfied. After everything she and her family did to you, you're really not angry at them at all? After all, without the Davenports, there would be no Leo Warren today. He might have been pulled back by his parents in middle school, forced to marry early and live out a quiet, unremarkable life in a small town, just because that's how his family had lived for generations. The Davenports had saved him. Everything he did afterward was just repaying a debt of gratitude. He had, admittedly, developed feelings for Isabel. Where her mother had first suggested he become her son-in-law, he had been overjoyed. And when he heard Isabel say she only saw him as a brother, he had been genuinely heartbroken. But all of that was buried in the past, right alongside the relationship Isabel herself had severed. I only see them as benefactors. They walked and talked, not noticing the figure that had been following them, The person who heard every word of their conversation and was now frozen in place. Only benefactors. Isabel suddenly remembered that day 3 years ago, at the party her friends threw to celebrate her recovery. They were talking about Leo's years of devotion. Now that Izzy's fully recovered, Leo's suffering is finally over. He's finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Izzy, when are you going to marry him? Hearing that question, her face had gone cold. Don't be ridiculous. I only see him as a brother. Thinking back, she realized Leo had walked in right after she said that. He must have heard her. At the time, she had felt that the years of her paralysis had made her seem pathetic and weak. She believed she was supposed to be a dazzling, untouchable star, admired by all, without a single flaw. So she desperately tried to distance herself from that period of her life, and by extension, from Leo, who was inextricably linked to it. She had arrogantly thought that as long as she acknowledged the debt, gave him enough money, and showed him enough respect, Leo should have been grateful to accept it. She had uttered those words so casually, never once considering how much they would hurt him. Until this moment, when she heard an almost identical phrase. I only see them as benefactors. What was this, if not karma? She looked down with a bitter smile and pulled a small, square velvet box from her trench coat pocket. With a soft click, the box opened, revealing its contents. It was a diamond ring. A 5-carat pink diamond was set in the center, flanked by smaller diamonds that formed 2 letters, I and L. She carefully took out the ring, her thumb gently tracing the raised letters. Isabel and Leo. It was the engagement ring she had secretly commissioned ever since she realized her true feelings. She never knew when she would see Leo again, so she carried it with her at all times, hoping for the day she could place it on his finger herself. She had finally gotten her reunion, but she never even got the chance to take the ring out of the box. The wedding invitation for Leo and Evelyn arrived at the Davenport Corporation headquarters 3 days later. As it happened, Chloe and a few other friends were there. The assistant brought the invitation up, and seeing only them in the office, paused for a moment before handing it over, asking them to pass it along. Staring at the crimson envelope, the women exchanged glances. Finally, unable to resist, they opened it. It's fine, one of them rationalized. It's just an invitation, not a state secret. But when they saw the names inside, a collective gasp went through the room. Leo Warren? Was it the Leo Warren they were all thinking of? Just then, a voice came from behind them. What are you all huddled around for? The sudden voice behind them made them all jump. They instinctively hid the invitation behind their backs, smiling sheepishly. Nothing at all. Before the words were even fully out, Chloe felt the invitation slip from her hand. She looked back to see that it was gone. A flash of red in Isabel's hand was unmistakable, the very invitation they had been trying to hide. Before they could stop her, Isabel had already opened it and seen the 2 names, Leo Warren and Evelyn Reed. Her eyes scanned down to the wedding date, October 21 SD. She pursed her lips, not saying a word, but everyone in the room felt a sudden chill, the temperature seeming to drop several degrees. Her mood had clearly plummeted. You know what? We have something to take care of, so we'll just go now. Seeing her like this, the others didn't dare to stay. They quickly made excuses and left one by one, until only Chloe remained. The next moment, she saw Isabel take out a small box. This wasn't the first time Chloe had seen that ring box. Over the past 3 years, she had often seen Isabel take it out and gently stroke it, as if reminiscing about someone. It was obvious who that someone was. When did Leo get back? Chloe asked, looking at the invitation. Something fell off. After a long silence, Isabel gave a bitter laugh, her voice muffled. 3 days ago, I saw him at the airport. Chloe's eyes widened at her words. He was seen 3 days ago, and the invitation arrived 3 days later. The intention to draw a clear line was painfully obvious. Chloe hesitated, then asked, What did you say to him? How did it come to? Before she could finish, Isabel shook her head. He said he came back this time specifically to get married. At that, Chloe fell silent too. She wanted to say more, but in the end, it all came out as a single sigh. What could she possibly say? Still, thinking about it brought a pang of regret. There was a time when they all thought Leo and Isabel would end up together. It was so clear back then that Leo was in love with her. If he hadn't been, how could he have possibly tolerated Isabel at her absolute worst? But just then, Isabel seemed to make a decision. I'm not giving up just like this. Leo was supposed to love her. He was supposed to be hers. Chloe, who had once rooted for them, was stunned by her words. After a moment, she looked at Isabel with a complex expression. What's the point? She hadn't cherished him then. Now that he was about to marry someone else, what was the point of holding on? There is no point. I love him, and I absolutely will not stand by and watch him marry someone else. Chloe was taken aback. She tried to reason with her. But he's in love with someone else now. What can you possibly do if he doesn't want you? She swallowed the last part of the sentence, but Isabel seemed to read her thoughts. She smiled faintly. So what? If I could make him fall in love with me once, I can make him fall in love with me a second time. Seeing she couldn't be reasoned with, Chloe shook her head and sighed in resignation. Fine, do what you want. But she knew Isabel probably wouldn't succeed. Perhaps Isabel hadn't realized it yet, but Leo was the kind of person who, once he made up his mind, never looked back. Just as he had decided to take care of a paralyzed Isabel, no matter how she hit him or pushed him away, he never thought of giving up. And just as he had silently planned his departure the moment he realized he was being pushed out of her life, disappearing from their world without a trace. Maybe some people had to hit a wall before they realized that what was lost, no matter how much they regretted it, could never be brought back. After everyone had left, Isabel took the ring out of its box. She looked at the letter L on the ring, stroked it gently, and whispered to herself, Leo, I will never, ever give up. Holding the wedding in New York had actually been Evelyn's father's idea. Although he now lived abroad, the rest of the Reed family was still in the States. Thinking that Evelyn's grandparents hadn't seen her in a long time, and that most of their friends were here, they decided to have this ceremony in the U.S. Planning a wedding was a whirlwind of exhausting tasks. With the date set so soon, they were constantly busy running around the city, so overwhelmed that Leo had no time to think about anything else. He had completely pushed Isabel from his mind. But he hadn't counted on the fact that while he had forgotten about Isabel, she had not forgotten about him, and she found him. When he was cornered at the entrance to a men's room for the second time, Leo felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It was the one time he had gone out alone, without Evelyn, and she had seized the opportunity. It was clear that for the rest of his time in New York, he couldn't go anywhere by himself. Is there something you need? After a moment of silence, Leo was the one to speak first. Isabel didn't answer his question. She just looked at him, her gaze intense like someone beholding a long-lost treasure. The look was so nakedly possessive that he couldn't help but frown. He was about to speak again when he saw her raise her hand. The next thing he knew, his vision went black, and he lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found himself in an incredibly familiar room. He sat up groggily and instinctively reached for his phone, but his pocket was empty. Before he could process it, a knock came at the door. He remained silent, but the person outside didn't seem to be waiting for an answer and opened the door anyway. The moment he saw it was Isabel, a sense of grim inevitability settled over him. Leo, would you like something to eat? Seeing him awake, she didn't mention his lack of response. Instead, she smiled warmly and placed a tray of food on the nearby table. I figured you'd be awake by now. You must be hungry. Leo looked at her again, surprised that she would do something like this. Feeling a genuine pang of hunger, he decided not to argue and simply took the cutlery and began to eat. She seemed surprised by his compliance, pausing for a moment before smiling again. It seems you're adjusting quickly, Leo. I'm glad all my effort to find your old things and decorate the room, just as it was when you lived here, wasn't wasted. Hearing this, Leo froze. He looked around at the room's decor and realized with a jolt that this was the exact room he had lived in 3 years ago. A strange emotion churned in his chest. After a moment, he looked at Isabel and asked, why? Why do all this? Why bring him here? Why go to the trouble of restoring the room to its former state? She remained seated a short distance away, the smile never leaving her lips. At his question, she pursed her lips, then reached in her pocket and pulled out the ring box she always carried. Because I love you, Leo. I can't just watch you leave me. She took out the ring and pushed it across the table toward him, her voice soft but filled with an emotion he couldn't ignore. Leo, please don't marry her. In my darkest moments, you were the only one who stood by me, who encouraged me to get through it. I once thought I could live without you, but after you left, I realized I can't. So Leo, don't leave me. Please don't abandon me. By the end, her face was a mask of anxiety and apprehension. Leo had never thought he would see this expression on Isabel Davenport's face, but as he listened to her words, he felt an almost imperceptible frown form. Love? What kind of belated love was this? In Leo's mind, love was something that couldn't be hidden. Even if you didn't recognize the feeling at the time, your subconscious would still move to protect and defend the person you cared for. It was like Evelyn with him. Even when he had repeatedly pushed her away, she had remained steadfast and patient, eventually winning him over with her genuine affection. But in all his time with Isabel, Leo had never felt that. Even in the later stages of her recovery, When her attitude toward him had softened from outright hostility, it had only ever reached a state of detached peace. "What about Mr. Croft?" Leo asked, his voice calm as he lowered his gaze to hide the emotion in his eyes. His question didn't seem to sadden her. In fact, a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. "Leo, don't worry. I can promise you I don't love Julian. Ever since I found out that he faked his fall down the stairs and poisoned himself to frame you, I made sure he paid the price. The Croft family name no longer exists in New York. I know I failed you in the past, but at the time, I was just so fixated on the fact that he abandoned me when I was at my weakest. He was my first love, and for 20-odd years, I had rarely made a wrong choice, whether in my studies or in business. But he was a mistake. I kept trying to prove to him that he was wrong, or maybe I was trying to erase the stain of his abandonment, to prove to myself that I hadn't chosen poorly. But Leo, it wasn't until you left that I realized how wrong I was. I don't care about any of that anymore. I only want you. Leo, I know I hurt you, but I know I was wrong now. Please, just give me one more chance. Please." Her eyes were filled with sorrow and pleading, desperately hoping for at least a nod, for anything but a rejection. But Leo just looked at her and slowly shook his head. He heard himself say, "Isabel, let me tell you a story. Once there was a little girl who had a very bad temper. Her mother gave her a wooden board and a bag of nails and told her that every time she got angry, she should hammer a nail into the board. The little girl listened. Every time she got angry, she hammered a nail into the board. A long time later, her mother brought her to the board and told her to pull out all the nails. The girl pulled them all out, but the board was forever covered in holes. Isabel, you and I are like that girl and that board. Some things, once done, cannot be undone. You can't just say forget it and make it all go away. The marks will always be there. They can't be erased." After the story, silence fell between them again. Isabel knew all of this, of course. She just wasn't willing to let go. Even if there was only a sliver of hope, she wanted Leo to put the past behind them and start over. "Can I have my phone back?" After a long pause, it was Leo who broke the silence, but his question immediately sent her into a panic. She hastily stood up and began clearing the table. "Since you're finished eating, I'll be going now. If you get bored in the room, you can walk around downstairs or in the garden. No one will stop you." With that, she gathered the dishes and hurried out of the room, her hasty retreat looking very much like a flight. Leo didn't stay in his room. Just as Isabel had said, after eating, he wandered around the garden, testing the limits of his freedom. He quickly figured out why she had fled at the mention of his phone. She didn't dare give it back. She had intentionally taken it, afraid he would immediately call for help. So she gave him the freedom of the penthouse, but cut off all means of communication with the outside world. He sat by the greenhouse, watching the sky turn a brilliant orange with the setting sun, his gaze occasionally drifting up to the second-floor study. Ever since he'd come out, Isabel had remained in the study, not emerging once. Isabel was never one to worry about the passage of time, but now she was afraid. Afraid that one day, he would leave her again, just like last time. So now, she cherished every moment she could spend with him. On the third day, as the sun was setting, Isabel returned. With her, she brought a large delivery of Phalaenopsis orchids. She had asked him 2 days ago if there was anything he wanted, and this was his request. The New York climate wasn't ideal for orchids, but with enough care and the right conditions, they could thrive. The long, empty hours gave him plenty of time to tend to them. He carefully repotted each orchid in the greenhouse, meticulously caring for them. Seeing that he genuinely seemed to enjoy it, Isabel finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you," he said, turning to Isabel, who had been waiting by the greenhouse door. He offered a small smile. She waved her hand, a wide grin threatening to split her face. "As long as you like them." She paused, then added, "Whatever you like, I'll do my best to find it for you." If the Leo from the past, the one who was still in love with her, had heard those words, he might have been moved. After all, what could be more touching than the person you love promising to bring you anything you desire? But this was a different Isabel, and this was no longer the Leo of the past. All his love for her had died the day she declared he was just a brother, the day she fought for Julian and left him at the bottom of the stairs without a second glance. During his time in the penthouse, Leo noticed that with each passing day, the place looked more and more like it did when they had lived there together. He accepted it all with a smile, and, as long as she didn't mention it, he pretended not to notice. He spent his days tending to his plants. When she came home from work, she would sit in the same room with her laptop. At dinner, she would sit beside him, eagerly placing food on his plate. One day, Isabel had to work late. Worried he would be bored, she called Chloe to come and keep him company. It was only when Chloe arrived at the penthouse and saw him that she realized the truth. Isabel was holding Leo captive. Oh my God, she's lost her mind. The words escaped her almost unconsciously. Compared to her shock, the captive himself remained remarkably calm, continuing to water a newly transplanted orchid. Hearing her outburst, he raised an eyebrow. I thought you all knew. Isabel rarely kept secrets from Chloe and her friends. Not her paralysis, not her volatile personality changes, not her attempts to get back with Julian, and not her renewed desire to be with him. He had assumed they were all aware of his current situation. But, judging by her reaction, it seemed this was news to her. Chloe shook her head, astonished by his composure. Aren't you getting married soon? How can you be so calm? Panicking won't help. He shrugged, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. She's taken away anything I could use to contact the outside world. Besides tending to these flowers to pass the time, there's not much else I can do. Hearing this, Chloe felt a pang of guilt. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't advise Isabel to let Leo go, nor could she promise Leo she would help him escape. The fortunes of her own family were too closely tied to the Davenport Corporation. She couldn't afford the consequences of Isabel's anger, nor could she risk her family for Leo's sake. Fortunately, Leo didn't expect her to help. He had faith that Evelyn wouldn't keep him waiting for too long. Isabel had cleared her entire schedule for his birthday, but it was only when she started planning the cake that she realized how little she truly knew about him. She didn't even know his favorite flavor. In a gesture of desperate overcompensation, she bought one of every kind from the finest bakery in the city. This was, she realized, the first time she had ever properly celebrated his birthday. Before her accident, a golden child like her would never have noticed the birthday of a scholarship student. Afterward, when he came in her life, she was so consumed by her own misery and the shame of being seen in her weakened state that she used him as an outlet for her frustrations. Later, under his care and encouragement, she had slowly healed and learned to put away her thorns, treating those around her with a measure of peace. But back then, those around her didn't truly include Leo. She was still bothered by the fact that he had seen every ugly moment of her decline, and she maintained a polite distance out of a sense of obligation. By the time she realized her true feelings, Leo had already packed his bags and quietly disappeared. But she reassured herself, it's okay. Even if I don't know enough about him now, we have a future. I will learn, piece by piece, every one of his habits and hobbies, and make them a part of my life. The moment she got home, she presented the mountain of gifts to him like a child seeking praise. Leo, see if there's anything you like. If not, I'll have someone go buy more. Before Isabel returned, Leo had prepared himself for two possibilities. Either she was faking her love and had forgotten his birthday, or she was genuine and would make a grand gesture. He was prepared for either. But when he saw the living room nearly overflowing with cakes and designer shopping bags, he couldn't help but stare. Why did you buy so much? Isabel's face fell. She opened her mouth, seemingly at a loss for words, and started stammering, trying to change the subject. Seeing her reaction, Leo understood immediately. In the limited time they had truly spent together, Isabel's focus had been on her paralyzed legs, on her ex-boyfriend Julian, who had abandoned her. The attention left for Leo was scarce. So scarce that now, when she was trying to win him over, she knew almost nothing about his preferences. He let out a soft, low chuckle. He suddenly felt a wave of relief that the person he had chosen was not Isabel. Seeing him smile, Isabel thought he was pleased with her efforts and smiled back. Leo didn't say anything. He simply picked a small box from the pile of gifts. This one is fine. He had chosen a pair of amethyst cufflinks. They weren't the most ostentatious gift in the pile, but they were still incredibly expensive. The cool, pale purple stones rested in his palm, making his skin look tan and healthy. He stared at the cufflinks, his gaze catching on the certificate of authenticity in the box. They were worth nearly $10,000, which made them one of the cheaper items in the room. For some reason, his mind drifted back to his first days in Boston. He'd had so little money, barely enough for a few meals, let alone a place to stay. He had been so desperate, working odd jobs to scrape by while trying to figure out his future. If he'd had these cufflinks back then, even selling them at a discount would have given him enough money to live comfortably for a while. Maybe he wouldn't have been so broke that he had to sleep in a sketchy part of town, where he was almost caught up in a murder investigation. But his luck had been good. Or perhaps, when you hit rock bottom, the only way to go is up. It was during that difficult time that he met the most important person in his life. He had met Evelyn while working a part-time job. Perhaps it was the joy of meeting someone from her home country, but she had struck up a conversation with him while ordering. He had responded out of professional courtesy, never imagining that those few sentences would connect him to his future. "Happy birthday, Leo." Isabel's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He forced a smile, lowering his eyes to hide the emotions swirling within them, and quietly said, "Thank you." As he was lost in thought, a slice of cake was placed in front of him. He looked up to see Isabel's smiling face. "Leo, you don't have to thank me. This was all a bit rushed. Next year, I promise I'll throw you a much grander, more fitting birthday party. How's that sound?" Leo didn't respond. He took a bite of the cake. The expensive cream was smooth and not overly sweet, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. He instinctively tightened his grip on the cufflinks, the amethyst clicking softly. The truth was, he didn't like any of these gifts. What he really wanted was to get out of here and go back to Evelyn. If only Evelyn were here. He missed her. He wondered if she had figured out where he was, if she was still frantically searching for him. When he got home, he promised himself he would stay put. He would never go anywhere without her by his side. This was the first birthday Leo had spent without any sense of anticipation since meeting Evelyn. Back in his room, he looked at the star-shaped decorations on his dresser and felt a fresh wave of frustration. He had already established a signal with her for if they ever got separated. It had been days. Why hadn't she come for him yet? But as soon as the thought crossed his mind, he sighed. The Reed family's influence was mostly abroad now. In New York, they were no match for the Davenport Corporation, a long-established behemoth. He would just have to wait a little longer. But if she missed their wedding date, he was going to have a serious talk with her when he got back. Leo had thought the worst Isabel would do was keep him here, trying to wear him down until he relented. He never imagined her goal was something far more drastic. With only a week left until the wedding, he was suddenly blindfolded and taken somewhere by Isabel. When the blindfold was removed, he found himself in a place that had been meticulously decorated. Countless white roses formed a giant heart, and further away, orchids spelled out the words, "Marry me." In front of him stood Isabel, wearing a wedding gown studded with 999 diamonds. Every strand of her hair was perfectly styled, a testament to her meticulous planning. Standing off to the side were Chloe and her friends, their smiles stiff and forced. When their eyes met his, they quickly looked away, a hint of guilt in their expressions. Isabel's face was flushed, her eyes, when she looked at him, filled with a nervous excitement. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt it might burst from her chest. "Leo, I love you. Can you please give me a chance to take care of you, to spend the rest of my life with you?" Time seemed to stop. Isabel wished this moment could last forever, yet she desperately wanted his answer to come quickly. The two conflicting desires warred in her mind, until the atmosphere was shattered by a sudden commotion. She frowned in annoyance and was about to ask what was happening when she saw Evelyn, accompanied by a group of police officers, bursting through the cordon of household staff. "NYPD, don't move, Leo." After a week of captivity, Leo finally heard the voice he had been waiting for. The moment he heard it, he turned, instinctively starting to walk toward Evelyn. But his wrist was suddenly seized. "Leo, please, don't go." From the moment she saw Evelyn, Isabel knew her stolen time was up. But seeing Leo turn to leave without a moment's hesitation, a sharp pain still shot through her heart. His slightly hoarse voice whispered in her ear. He looked down at the hand, gripping his wrist, slender, pale, and wearing a ring. It was the matching pair to the one she had offered him when he first arrived. In the moment of silence that followed, both sides held their breath. Isabel was terrified he would leave, and Evelyn was terrified he would stay, afraid he would ultimately choose the woman who had occupied his entire youth. But he only paused for a second before he began to gently pry her fingers off, one by one. "I'm sorry, Isabel. I already have a new life. You should go live yours." He paused again. "Isabel, people have to move forward. Don't be trapped in the past. You'll only miss out on more." His departure was a relief even to Chloe and her friends. They all knew that if Leo had been forced to stay, his days would have been spent like this one. Trapped, receiving Isabel's obsessive love, but never finding true happiness. Perhaps this was the definition of fated, but not destined. They had both loved each other, but never at the same time. When he loved her most, she was consumed by her own pride, focusing all her attention on the man who had abandoned her, unwilling to spare a glance for the person who truly mattered. And when he left, she finally regretted it, finally wanted to win him back. But in this world, no one waits forever. A week later, the wedding took place as planned. Leo hadn't invited his own parents. The role his father would have played was filled by Evelyn's father. He walked Leo down the aisle, his elegant suit making him look like a true prince. Even though it was his daughter's wedding, Evelyn's father looked emotional, as if he were the one giving away his child. He dabbed at his eyes as he warned Evelyn. "You rascal, you better take good care of Leo. If you don't, your mother and I will have a serious talk with you." Evelyn's eyes overflowed with happiness. She took Leo's hand from her father, her words both a promise to him and a vow to Leo. "I will cherish Leo, I will never let him get hurt again, and I will love him for the rest of my life." The raw emotion of her words made Leo's ears turn red. He smiled, his eyes filled with love. "I believe you." The officiant continued, a broad smile on his face. "Evelyn, do you take Leo to be your husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" "I do." "And Leo, do you take Evelyn to be your wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" Leo turned to her, gently squeezing her hand, a wide, radiant smile spreading across his face. "I do." As applause erupted, Leo and Evelyn exchanged rings. The officiant then declared, "You may now kiss." This was the first time Leo had done something so intimate in front of so many people. He lifted Evelyn's veil, leaning in closer and closer. Their warm breaths mingled, intimate and tender. "Silly, close your eyes," she whispered with a soft laugh. Blushing, he closed his eyes. The next moment, a soft, gentle touch met his lips. In the audience, Isabel watched this scene, her heart constricting with a pain so sharp it felt like 1,000 needles were piercing it at once. And yet, she didn't even have the right to cry out. This was all her own doing. It was her own arrogance that had made her lose the person she should have cherished most. Amid the cheers and celebration, she was the only one to quietly slip away. Inside, the ballroom was full of guests. Outside, Isabel came face to face with 2 police officers holding a warrant. "NYPD Ms. Davenport, you are a suspect in a case of unlawful imprisonment. We are now taking you into custody. Please cooperate." Isabel was silent for a moment, then glanced back toward the ballroom. They certainly picked a good day for this. She nodded, offered no resistance, and obediently got into the police car. The next time Leo saw Isabel was 3 months later. They had finished their honeymoon and spent a long time at the Reed family home with Evelyn's grandparents. It was only when the clinic in Boston could wait no longer that they finally headed back. But as soon as they arrived at JFK, Leo saw an unexpected person. She was sitting casually on the steps outside the terminal, surrounded by a few stray cats who were meowing and rubbing against her for the food she held. She was stroking one of them absently when she looked up and her eyes met his. She picked up one of the cats and walked slowly toward him. "Leaving for good this time?" He nodded in response. She looked down and gave a bitter smile. "Goodbye then. Have a safe flight." Isabel watched their backs as they disappeared into the crowd. They wouldn't be coming back, and she couldn't leave the country. This goodbye was truly the last one. End of novel.